They were searching the house for some unknown source of disturbance which had thrown all the cats into a snarling panic. It caused them to plunge precipitately down several flights of stairs and squat yowling before this closed door to the subcellar. I asked them if they heard the rats, but they replied in the negative. And when I turned to call their attention to the sounds in the panels, I realized that the noise had ceased. With the two men, I went to the door of the subcellar, but found the cats already dispersed. Later, I resolved to explore the crypt below, but for the present, I merely made a round of the traps. All were sprung, yet were tenantless. Satisfying myself that no one had heard the rats save the felines and me, I sat in my study till morning, thinking profoundly, and recalling every scrap of legend I had unearthed concerning the building I inhabited. I slept some in the forenoon, leaning back in one comfortable library chair which my medieval plan and furnishing could not banish. Later, I telephoned to Captain Norris, who came over to help me explore the subcellar. Absolutely nothing untoward was found, although we could not repress a thrill at the knowledge of this vault was built by Roman hands. Every low arch and massive pillar was Roman, not the debased Romanesque of the bungling Saxons, but the severe and harmonious classicism of the age of the Caesars. Indeed, the walls were abounded with inscriptions familiar to the antiquarians who repeatedly explored the place. Things like P. Gete, Prop, Temp, Donna, and L. Prace versus Pontify, Attis. The reference to Attis made me shiver, for I have read Catullus and knew something of the hideous rites of the Eastern god, whose worship was so mixed with that of Cybele. Norris and I, by the light of the lanterns, tried to interpret the odd and nearly effaced designs on certain rectangular blocks of stone, generally held to be altars, but could make nothing of them. We remember that one pattern, that sort of rayed sun, was held by students to imply a non-Roman origin, suggesting that all these altars had merely been adopted by the Roman priests for some older and perhaps aboriginal temple on the same site. On one of these blocks were some brown stains which made me wonder. The largest, in the center of the room, had certain features on the upper surface which indicated its connection with fire, probably burnt offerings. Such were the sights in the crypt, that crypt, before whose doors the cats had howled, and where Norris and I determined to pass the night. Couches were down by the servants, and who were told not to mind any nocturnal actions of the cats. A nigger man was admitted as much for help as for companionship. We decided to keep the great oak door, a modern replica for slits for ventilation, tightly closed, and with this attended to, we will retire with lanterns still burning to await whatever might occur. The vault was very deep in the foundations of the priory, and undoubtedly far down on the face of the beetling limestone cliff overlooking the waste valley. That it had been the goal of the scuffling and unexplainable rats I could not doubt, though why I could not tell. As we lay there unexpectedly, I found my vigil occasionally mixed with half-formed dreams from which the uneasy motions of the cat across my feet would rouse me. These dreams were not wholesome, but horribly like the one I had the night before. I saw again the twilight grotto, and horribly and the swineherd with his unmentionable fungus beast wallowing in filth. And as I looked at these things, they seemed nearer and more distinct. So distinct that I could almost observe their features. Then I did observe the flabby features of one of them, and awake with such a scream that Nigger Man started up, whilst Captain Norris, who had not slept, laughed considerably. Norris might have laughed more, or perhaps less, had he known what it was that made me scream, but I did not remember myself till later. Ultimate horror often paralyzes memory in a merciful way. Norris waked me when the phenomena began, out of the same frightful dream I was called by his gentle shaking and his urging to listen to the cats. Indeed, there was much to listen to, for beyond the closed door at the head of the stone steps was a veritable nightmare of feline yelling and clawing, whilst Nigger Man, unmindful of his kindred outside, was running excitedly around the bare stone walls, in which I heard the same babble of scurrying rats that had troubled me the night before. An acute terror now rose within me, for here were anomalies which nothing normal could well explain. These rats, if not the creatures of a madness which I shared with the cats alone, must be burrowing and sliding in Roman walls, and I had thought to be of solid limestone blocks, unless perhaps the action of the water through more than 17 centuries had eaten winding tunnels through which rodent bodies had worn clear and amble. But even so, the spectral horror was no less. For if these were living vermin, why did Norris hear their disgusting... Why did not Norris hear their disgusting commotion? Why did he urge me to watch Nigger Man and listen to the cats outside? And why did he guess wildly and vaguely at what could have aroused them? By the time I managed to tell him, as rationally as I could, whilst what I thought I was hearing, my ears gave me the last fading impression of the scurrying, which had retreated still downward, far underneath this deepest of subcellars, till it seemed as if the whole cliff below were riddled with questing rats. Norris was not as skeptical as I had anticipated, but instead it seemed profoundly moved. He motioned to me to notice that the cats at the door had ceased their clamor, as if giving up the rats for lost, whilst Nigger Man had a burst of renewed restlessness and was clawing frantically around the bottom of this large stone altar in the center of the room, which was nearer Norris' couch than mine. My fear of the unknown was at this point very great. Something astounding had occurred, and I saw that Captain Norris, a younger, stouter, and presumably more naturally materialistic man, was affected fully as much as myself, perhaps because of his lifelong and intimate familiarity with the local legend. We could for the moment do nothing but watch the old cat as he pawed with decreasing fervor at the base of the altar, occasionally looking up and mewing to me in that persuasive manner which he used to wish me to perform some favor for him. Norris now took a lantern close to the altar and examined the place where Nigger Man was pawing, silently and kneeling and scraping away the lichens of centuries which joined the massive pre-Roman block to the tessellated floor. He did not find anything and was about to abandon his efforts when I noticed a trivial circumstance which made me shudder, even though it implied nothing more than I had already imagined. I told him of it, and then we both looked at it almost imperceptible manifestation with the fixedness of fascinated discovery and acknowledgement. It was only this, that the flame of the lantern had set down near the altar was slightly but certainly flickering from a draught of air which it had not before received, and which came indubitably from the crevice between floor and altar where Norris was scraping away the lichens. We spent the rest of the night in the brilliantly lighted study, nervously discussing what we should do next. The discovery that some vault deeper than the deepest known masonry of the Romans underlay this accursed pile. Some vault unsuspected by the curious antiquarians of those 3 centuries would have been sufficient to excite us without any background of the sinister. As it was, the fascination became twofold, and we paused in doubt whether to abandon our search and quit the priory forever in superstitious caution, or to gratify our sense of adventure and brave whatever horrors might await us in the unknown depths. By morning, we had compromised and decided to go to London to gather a group of archaeologists and scientific men fit to cope with the mystery. It should be mentioned that before leaving the subcellar, we had vainly tried to move the central altar, which we had now recognized as the gate to a new pit of nameless fear. What secret would open the gate wiser men than us than we would have to find? During the many days in London, Captain Norris and I presented our facts, conjectures, and legendary anecdotes to 5 eminent authorities, all men who could be trusted to respect any family disclosures which future explorations might develop. We found most of them little disposed to scoff, but instead intensely interested and sincerely sympathetic. It is hardly necessary to name them all, but I may say that they included Sir William Britton, whose excavations in the Troad excited most of the world in their day. As we all took the train for Anchester, I found myself poised on the brink of its frightful revelations, a sensation symbolized by the air of mourning among the many Americans at the unexpected death of the president on the other side of the world. On the evening of August 7th, we reached Exham Priory, where the servants assured me that nothing unusual had occurred. The cats, even old nigger man, had been perfectly placid, and not a trap in the house had been sprung. We were to begin exploring on the following day, awaiting which I had assigned well-appointed rooms to all my guests. I myself retired to my own tower chamber, with nigger man across my feet. Sleep came quickly, but hideous dreams assailed me. There was a vision of a Roman feast like that of Trimalchio, with the horror in a covered platter. Then came that damnable recurrent thing about the swineherd and his filthy drove in the twilight grotto. Yet when I awoke, it was full daylight, with normal sounds in the house below. The rats, living or spectral, had not troubled me, and nigger man was still quietly asleep. On going down, I found that the same tranquility had prevailed elsewhere, a condition which one of the assembled Sabins, a fellow named Thornton, devoted to the psychic, rather than absurdly laid to the fact that I had now been shown the thing which certain forces which had wished to show me. All was now ready, and at 11 a.m., our entire group of 7 men, bearing powerful electric searchlights and implements of excavation, went down to the subcellar and bolted the door behind us. Niggerman was with us, and for the investigators found no occasion to despise his excitability, and were indeed anxious that he be present in the case of obscure rodent manifestations. We noted that the Roman inscriptions had unknown altered designs only briefly, for 3 of the Sabins had already seen them, and all knew their characteristics. Prime attention was paid to the momentous central altar. Within an hour, Sir William Brenton had caused it to tilt backwards, balanced by some unknown species of counterweight. There now lay revealed such a horror as would have overwhelmed us had we not been prepared. Through a nearly square opening in the tiled floor, sprawling on a flight of stone steps, and so prodigiously worn that it was little more than an inclined plane at the center, was a ghastly array of human or semi-human bones. Those which retained their collocation as skeletons showed attitudes of panic, fear, and over all were the marks of rodent gnawing. The skulls denoted nothing short of utter idiocy, cretinism, or primitive semi-apedom. Above the hellishly littered steps arched a descending passage seemingly chiseled from a solid rock, and conducting a current of air. This current was not a sudden and noxious rush as from a closed vault, but a cool breeze with something of freshness in it. We did not pause long, but shiveringly began to clear a path down the steps. It was then that Sir William, examining the honed walls, made the odd observation that the passage, according in the direction of the strokes, must have been chiseled from beneath. I must be very deliberate now and choose my words. After plowing down a few steps, amid the gnawed bones, we saw that there was a light ahead, not any mystic phosphorescence, but a filtered daylight which could not come except from unknown fissures in the cliff that had overlooked the waste valley. That such fissures had escaped notice from outside was hardly remarkable, for not only is the valley wholly uninhabited, but the cliff is so high and beetling that only an aeronaut could study its face in detail. A few steps more, and our breaths were literally snatched from us by what we saw. So literally that Thornton, the psychic investigator, had actually fainted in the arms of the dazed man who stood behind him. Norris, his plump face utterly white and flabby, simply cried out inarticulately, whilst I think that what I did was to gasp or hiss or cover my eyes. The man behind me, the only one of the party older than I, croaked a hackneyed, "My God," in the most cracked voice I ever heard. Of 7 cultivated men, only Sir William Brenton retained his composure, a thing more to his credit because he led the party and must have seen the sight first. It was a twilight grotto of enormous height, stretching away farther than any eye could see. A subterraneous world of limitless mystery and horrible suggestion. There were buildings and other architectural remains. In one terrified glance, I saw a weird pattern of tumuli, a savage circle of monoliths, a low-domed Roman ruin, a sprawling Saxon pile, and an early English edifice of wood. But all these were dwarfed by the ghoulish spectacle presented by the general surface of the ground. For yards above the steps were extended an insane tangle of human bones, or bones at least as human as those on the steps. Like a foamy sea they stretched, some falling apart, but others wholly or partly articulated as skeletons. These latter invariably impostors of demonic frenzy, either fighting off some menace or clutching other forms with cannibal intent. When Dr. Trask, the anthropologist, stooped to classify the stalls, he found a degraded mixture which utterly baffled him. They were mostly lower than the Piltdown man of the scale of evolution, but in every case definitely human. Many were of higher grade, and a few were the skulls of supremely and sensitively developed types. All the bones were gnawed mostly by rats, but somewhat by others of the half-human drove. Mixed with them were many tiny bones of rats, fallen members of the lethal army which closed the ancient epic. I wonder that any man among us lived and kept his sanity through that hideous day of discovery. Not Hoffman, or Huysman could conceive a scene of more wildly incredible, more phonetically repellent, or more gothically grotesque than the twilight grotto through which we seven staggered, each stumbling on revelation rather after revelation, and trying to keep for the nonce from thinking of the events which must have taken place there 300 or 1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 years ago. It was the antechamber of hell, and poor Thornton fainted again when Trask told him that some of the skeleton things must have descended as quadrupeds through the last 20 or more generations. Horror piled on horror as we began to interpret the architectural remains. The quadruped things, which with their occasional recruits from the biped class, had been kept in stone pens, out of which they must have broken in their last delirium of hunger or rat fear. There had been great herds of them, evidently fattened on the coarse vegetables whose remains could be found as a sort of poisonous ensilage at the bottom of the huge stone bins older than Rome. I knew now why my ancestors had such extensive gardens. Would to heaven I could forget. The purpose of the herds I did not have to ask. Sir William, standing with the searchlight in the Roman ruin, translated aloud the most shocking ritual I ever known, and told of the diet of the antediluvian cult which the priests of Cybele found and mingled with their own. Norris, used as he was to the trenches, could not walk straight when he came out of the English building. It was a butcher shop and kitchen. He had expected that, but it was too much to see familiar English implements in such a place, and to read familiar English graffiti there, some as recent as 1610. I could not go into that building whose demon activities were stopped only by the dagger of my ancestor Walter de la Poée. What I did venture to enter was the low Saxon building, whose oaken door had fallen, and there I found a terrible row of 10 stone cells with rusty bars. 3 had tenants, all skeletons of high grade, and on the bony forefinger of one I found a seal ring with my own coat of arms. Sir William found a vault with far older cells below the Roman chapel, but these cells were empty. Below them was a low crypt with cases of formerly arranged bones, some of them bearing terrible parallel inscriptions carved in Latin, Greek, and the tongue of Phrygia. Meanwhile, Dr. Trask had opened one of the prehistoric tumuli and brought to light skulls which were slightly more human than a gorilla's, and which bore indescribable ideographic carvings. Through all this horror, my cat stalked unperturbed. Once I saw him monstrously perched upon the top of a mountain of bones, and wondered at the secrets that might have lied behind his yellow eyes. Having grasped to some slight degree the frightful revelations of this twilight area, an area so hideously foreshadowed by my recurrent dream, we returned to that apparently boundless depth of midnight cavern where no ray of light from the cliff could penetrate. We shall never know what sightless Stygian worlds yawned beyond that little distance we went, for it was decided that such secrets are not good for mankind. But these were plenty to engross us close at hand, for we had not gone far before the searchlights showed that accursed infinity of pits in which the rats had feasted, and whose sudden lack of replenishment had driven the ravenous rodents army first to turn on the living herds of starving things, and then to burst forth from the priory from that historic orgy of devastation which the peasants will never forget. God, those carrion black pits of sawed, picked bones and open skulls. Those nightmare chasms choked with the picanthropod, Celtic, Roman, and English bones of countless unhallowed centuries. Some of them were full, and none could say how deep they had once been. Others were still bottomless to our searchlights, and peopled with unnameable fancies. What I thought of the hapless rats that stumbled in such traps amid the blackness of their quest in this grisly Tartarus. Once my foot slipped near a horrible yawning brink, and I had a moment of ecstatic fear. I must have been amusing a long time, for I could not see any of the party but the plump Captain Norris. Then there came a sound from the inky's boundless farther distance that I thought I knew, and I saw my old black cat dart past me like a winged Egyptian god, straight into the illimitable gulf of the unknown. But I was not far behind, for there were no doubt after another second. It was the elders of the scurry of those fiend-born rats, always questing for new horrors, and determined to lead me on, even unto grinning caverns of earth's centers where Nyarlathotep, the mad faceless god, howls blindly in the darkness to the piping of two amorphous, idiot flute players. My searchlight expired, but still I ran. I heard voices and yowls and echoes, but above all, they were gently rose that impious insidious scurrying, gently rising, as a stiff-bloated corpse gently rises above an oily river that flows under endless onyx bridges to a black putrid sea. Something bumped into me. Something soft and plump. It must have been the rats. Their viscous, gelatinous, ravenous army that feast on the dead and the living. Why shouldn't rats eat a delapoia as a delapoia eats forbidden things? The war ate my boy. Damn them all. And the Yanks ate Carfax with flames and unburnt grandsire Delapore and the secret. No, I tell you, I am not that demon swineherd in that twilight grotto. It was not Edward Norris's fat face and the flabby fungus thing. Who says I am a Delapoyer? He lived, but my boy died. Shall a Norris hold the lands of a Delapoyer? It's voodoo, I tell you. That spotted snake. Curse you, Thornton. I'll teach you to faint at what my family do. It's blood, thou stinkard. I'll learn ye how to gust. Would ye swine me thilk wise? Magna Mater, Attis, dia ad agatus, ad Odane, August, Bos, Dunoc, Orc, Donus, Dolus, Orc, August, Litsa, Ungul, Rolle. That is what they say. I said. Well, that is what they say. I said when they found me in the blackness after 3 hours. Found me crouching in the blackness over the plump, half-eaten body of Captain Norris, with my own cat leaping and tearing at my own throat. Now they have blown up Axon Priory, taken my nigger man away from me, and shut me into this barren room, this barred room. At Handwell, with fearful whispers about my heredity and experiences. Thornton is in the next room, but they prevent me from talking to him. They are trying to suppress me most of the facts concerning the Priory. When I speak of poor Norris, they accuse me of a hideous thing, but they must know I did not do it. They must know it was the rats, the slithering, scurrying rats, whose scampering will never let me sleep. The demon rats that race behind the padding in this room and beckon me down to greater horrors that I have ever known. The rats, they can never hear. The rats. The rats in the walls. Hmm.